Salems Lot UK presents A Return to the Lot. The heavy front door of the Glick house groaned shut. Ben and Mark, as they stepped out into the murky daylight, the sun hovered high above, but its rays couldn't seem to pierce the gloom clinging to the old structure like a second skin. They had barely gone 10 paces when a voice called out. Faint but unmistakable.
Danny? Where are you, Danny, darling?
The words floated through the air, eerie and unnatural, as if carried not by sound but by memory itself. Ben turned slowly. Mark's face had gone pale.
Is that Marjorie Glick?
Ben's jaw tightened.
It's coming from upstairs.
Without another word, they turned back to the door and stepped inside once more, swallowed again by the house's rotting breath. Their footfalls were soft, deliberate, an instinct more than a tactic. Stealth was pointless. She knew they were coming. She had felt them the moment they crossed the threshold. The staircase loomed before them like the throat of a sleeping beast, winding up into a second floor shrouded in unnatural darkness. Though it was still daytime, not a sliver of light touched the steps. It was as if the house had swallowed the sun itself. They climbed slowly. Halfway up, Ben's grip tightened on the stake in his hand. Mark held his crucifix out before him, scanning every shadow, every creak in the walls. At the top landing, the silence broke with a sudden hiss, sharp, wet, and furious. It came from behind the last door on the right. Mark inched forward, raising the cross. One hand reached for the doorknob. Beside him, Ben readied the stake in holy water. The knob turned. The door creaked open. Inside, the air was thick and heavy, and the room was cloaked in gloom. Dust floated in the stillness like particles of decay. And there she was. Marjorie Glick hovered 6 inches above the floor. Her back was straight, her head tilted slightly to one side, as if listening to something only she could hear. Her eyes were blank, glowing faintly, and fixed on nothing. Mark stepped forward, crucifix raised.
Mrs. Glick.
He said, his voice steady. Her eyes snapped to him. With a guttural snarl, she lunged, but Mark was ready. He thrust the crucifix forward, and she recoiled, hissing like steam escaping a boiler. Her face contorted in rage, and she tried to strike him with clawed hands. Ben moved fast. The holy water arced through the air and splashed across her face. She screamed. It was a sound not meant for the living, something ancient and unholy. Smoke rose from her skin, her hands flying to her face as if trying to hold it together. But it was already too late. Ben lunged, stake raised high. With one brutal motion, he drove it down into her chest. Marjorie stiffened.
No coming back from this one.
Ben muttered. A pulse of unnatural force erupted from her body, and then she was gone, her form shooting to the ceiling in a whirl of black ash and glowing orange embers. The remains drifted downward like snowfall, settling in eerie silence. Mark's breath caught.
Where's Ralphie?
He asked, scanning the room.
He must be nearby.
Ben turned, opening his mouth to respond, but before a word left his lips, the wardrobe exploded. The doors flew open so violently they cracked against the walls. A blur of pale flesh and outstretched claws burst forth. Ralphie Glick. His small form twisted through the air like a vengeful ghost, arms stretched wide, mouth open in a snarl. He flew straight at Ben. Ben stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the bed. He crashed to the floor, hard, with Ralphie landing on top of him, clawing and shrieking like a wild animal. His eyes were glowing coals, his mouth filled with jagged, blood-stained teeth. Ben tried to push him off, but Ralphie was fast and inhumanly strong, lashing out with both hands, trying to get his mouth to Ben's throat. The boy was no longer a boy. He was a vampire, and he was hungry. Ralphie Glick was on top of Ben, his face twisted into something barely human. His mouth opened in a silent snarl, eyes wide with unnatural hunger, fingers clawing at Ben's chest. Ben struggled, pinned to the floor, the cold weight of the creature pressing down on him. He reached for the steak but couldn't get to it in time. With a shout, Mark threw himself onto Ralphie from behind, grabbing hold of the boy's wrists and yanking him back. Ralphie twisted and writhed, trying to free himself, but Mark held him fast, forcing his arms out wide into a crucifix position.
Stake him now, Ben.
Mark shouted, straining to keep hold. Ben rolled onto his side and searched the floor, eyes darting in the half-light. He spotted the stake, still lying near the ash pile that had once been Marjorie. His fingers closed around it.
Got it.
He gasped. He rose to one knee, braced himself, and reached forward. One hand gripped Ralphie's shoulder. The boy's face twisted in fury, a low hiss escaping his lips. Ben didn't flinch. He drove the stake forward. The wood struck home, right through the heart. Ralphie let out a sharp, echoing cry that rattled the windows and seemed to hang in the air. His body jolted in Mark's grasp, trembling violently. And then, silence. A moment later, Ralphie collapsed into dust. His form unraveled into fine black ash. Ben let out a long, shaking breath and dropped the stake. Mark stepped back, arms falling to his sides, his face pale and drawn. They both stood in the eerie stillness, chest heaving, hearts pounding. Mark stumbled slightly, knees buckling. Ben caught him, steadying him with a firm arm around his shoulder.
You all right?
Ben asked. Mark nodded weakly.
Yeah. I think so.
Come on.
Ben said. His voice was quiet, but steady now.
Time to leave.
Together, they turned from the room filled with ash and memory and made their way out of the house. A hush had settled over Ferndale as Ben and Mark rolled into town. The late afternoon sun hung low, its light filtered through thick, hazy clouds that cast long shadows over the streets. The town seemed quieter than usual, as though it too sensed something drawing near. They pulled up beside Tookie's bar, the neon sign flickering half-heartedly in the window. Ben turned off the engine. Both men sat in silence, the hum of the car cooling filling the void. Then Mark leaned forward, eyes narrowing.
Ben. Look.
He said. Across the road, a sleek black Cadillac approached, its polished surface reflecting the dull light like obsidian. The vehicle glided along the road with a smoothness that made it seem detached from the world around it. Mark's voice sharpened.
Straker.
Ben stepped out of the car and stood firm on the sidewalk, watching the Cadillac draw near. As it passed, the driver turned his head slowly. Richard Straker. His face was pale, angular, emotionless, until he caught Ben's eye. Then came the grin. A slow, knowing curve of the lips. Not amusement. Not surprise. Recognition. Challenge. Ben held his stare, unflinching. Straker's gaze lingered for a moment longer before he turned his head back to the road. The Cadillac drifted away. In his rearview mirror, Straker watched as Ben and Mark remained standing by the roadside, unmoving sentinels in the fading light. He smiled again, faint but satisfied. Miles away, the Cadillac pulled off the main road and rolled onto a gravel lot surrounded by crumbling trees and silence. The ruins of the Marston house stood ahead. Straker stopped the car next to a wide, open maw in the ground, the entrance to the old cellar. He stepped out of the car and moved to the trunk. With a click, it opened to reveal a wooden crate lined with straw. Nestled inside were 12 dark glass bottles, each filled with a thick red liquid. Blood. He lifted the crate carefully, reverently, and carried it to the edge of the cellar. There, he set it down on the dirt and knelt. One by one, he uncorked the bottles. With each twist of the cap, a faint coppery scent rose into the air. He tilted the first bottle, pouring its contents into the darkness below. The blood struck the ash and dirt with a sickening splash, soaking into the ground. Then the next. And the next. All 12 bottles were emptied, each offering poured with a kind of quiet ritual. When the last was gone, Straker set the bottle down, his eyes fixed on the seller's mouth.
Someone's back in town. And you have unfinished business.
The room above Tookie's bar was small, but it was quiet, for now. Mark sat at the window, arms folded on the sill, his gaze locked onto the parking lot bathed in the pale glow of the full moon. The lot was empty, save for a few scattered vehicles, their shadows long and unnatural in the moonlight. He hadn't said a word since they'd returned. Finally, he broke the silence.
He saw us.
Ben stood behind him, drying his hands with a towel.
Yes.
You think they'll come for us?
I don't know. Just be ready.
They cleaned up in silence, each man locked in his thoughts. The blood and dust were gone from their clothes, but not from their minds. After changing into fresh shirts and jackets, they made their way downstairs to the bar. Tookie was behind the counter, polishing glasses with the slow rhythm of someone used to late nights and stranger stories. He looked up and grinned when they entered.
Fancy a steak?
Mark and Ben exchanged a look.
With all the trimmings, I hope.
Ben said with a half-smile.
Oh, you mean meat?
Mark added, and Tookie raised an eyebrow.
Well, what other kind of steak would I mean?
Tookie laughed.
It's a strange night tonight, I tell ya. You two ask about steaks, and then some other guy asks to be invited in. What's everyone been on today?
Ben's smile vanished.
Invited?
Tookie nodded, towards the corner.
Yeah. Guy over there. Hasn't eaten, hasn't ordered. Just sits there. Rocking back and forth.
Ben followed the line of Tookie's gaze, and felt his stomach drop. In the shadowy far end of the bar sat a figure, hunched, barely moving.
Mike?
Ben whispered. Then louder.
Mike Ryerson. Is that you?
The figure looked up. Mike's eyes gleamed unnaturally under the dim bar lights, a predator's reflection. Mark was already moving. He slipped away, hurrying up the stairs, nearly tripping in his urgency. His hands shook as he fumbled with the key to their room. He shoved open the door, ran to the bed, and grabbed Ben's blue bag. He was back downstairs in seconds, breathless.
Here.
Thrusting it into Ben's hands. Ben unzipped the bag, pulled out a crucifix, and passed it to Mark. Then he took the steak and a vial of holy water for himself. He turned to Tookie.
You might want to step outside for a minute. You're not going to want to see this.
Tookie frowned.
What are you talking about?
Across the room, Mike stood. His body twisted as he rose.
Mias. Ben Mias. Sleep like the dead Mias.
Mark held the crucifix out in front of him. It trembled in his grip, but the symbol glowed faintly as it faced the thing that had once been Mike Ryerson. Ben stepped forward, closing the space between them. Mike recoiled from the crucifix, hissing, then bared his teeth and sprang toward Ben.
Not in my bar.
He reached under the counter and grabbed a baseball bat, slamming it down onto the surface.
If you're gonna fight, take it outside.
But it was already too late. Mike launched himself forward. Ben raised the stake, but Mike struck it from his hand. It clattered across the floor. They collided, grappling violently, crashing over a table that splintered beneath them. Chairs flew in all directions. Ben hit the ground hard with Mike on top of him, the vampire's hands clutching at his throat. His fingers scrabbled on the floor, reaching. Then he felt it, a jagged piece of the broken chair. Splintered. Sharp. Without thinking, Ben seized it and drove it backward, straight into Mike's back. Mike let out an unearthly shriek. His body convulsed, froze, then turned to dust in Ben's arms. Silence fell. Ben lay on the floor, covered in ash, breathing hard. Slowly, he sat up and looked at Tookie, who stood frozen behind the bar, eyes wide with shock. Ben brushing soot from his sleeve.
No easy way to say this. Do you believe in vampires?